Tonight, we uncover one of the most staggering stories of World War II, a tale that left German spies stunned, American workers exhausted yet proud, and the world's largest industry empire reshaped forever. This is the story of how the Ford Motor Company, once famous for the Model T, turned its factories into assembly lines of destruction, producing the mighty B-24 Liberator bomber, a machine so complex it contained nearly 1.5 million individual parts. And yet, in a feat that defied belief, Ford was building one every 63 minutes. For Nazi Germany, this was more than a statistic. It was a nightmare. As the 1930s ended, Adolf Hitler's Luftwaffe had terrorized Europe with swift blitzkrieg attacks. German engineers believed that sheer speed and precision in the air could cripple any opponent. But what they underestimated was not another advanced fighter. It was America's factories. At the dawn of the war, the United States was not yet a superpower in arms. Its air fleet was small, its production scattered, and its people largely reluctant to fight another European war. Yet across the Atlantic, men like Albert Speer, the Third Reich's armaments minister, watched nervously. He knew America possessed something Germany did not: unlimited industrial muscle. And in Detroit, Henry Ford's empire was about to prove it. The B-24 Liberator was not a simple aircraft. Unlike the rugged B-17 Flying Fortress, the B-24 was a high-speed, long-range bomber with advanced wings, hydraulics, and gun turrets. Each one demanded an orchestra of parts: rivets, engines, wiring, plexiglass, and controls, all fitted with machine precision. At first, building one B-24 took months. A single aircraft required a small army of skilled craftsmen. No one in the world imagined these machines could roll off an assembly line like cars. But one man did. Charles Sorensen, Ford's production genius, studied the B-24 and declared, "We will build them like Model Ts." His vision was audacious: a massive factory, longer than any in existence, where bombers would move nose to tail, each worker adding a piece until a complete airplane emerged at the other end. This dream became Willow Run. Willow Run was not just a factory, it was a city of steel and concrete, stretching a mile in length with enough space to house the largest assembly operation on Earth. Inside, tens of thousands of men and women, farmers' sons, auto mechanics, and housewives would work shoulder to shoulder around the clock, assembling the most advanced bomber in the U.S. arsenal. To the Germans, such an idea was fantasy. Spies reported whispers of Ford's plans, but few believed it. One bomber every hour? Impossible, they said. Even the Luftwaffe's best engineers could not imagine an industrial rhythm so relentless. Yet in 1942, the impossible became reality. When the first completed B-24 rolled out of Willow Run, painted in olive drab and armed with .50 caliber machine guns, word spread quickly. Soon, the numbers climbed. Dozens a day, hundreds a month. By the height of production, Ford workers were turning out a finished bomber every 63 minutes, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. German spies intercepted the reports. At first, they dismissed them as propaganda, but as formations of liberators filled the skies over Europe, bombing oil refineries, rail yards, and weapons plants, the truth could no longer be denied. America's arsenal of democracy had been unleashed, and for the German war machine, the nightmare was only beginning. The opening of Willow Run was more than just an industrial milestone. It was a turning point in global warfare. But behind the gleaming statistics and the patriotic slogans, there was chaos, doubt, and sacrifice. Ford's engineers were entering uncharted territory. Never before had a company attempted to mass-produce something as complicated as a heavy bomber. At first, the project looked doomed. The initial months of Willow Run were a disaster. Machinery broke down, parts didn't fit, and untrained workers struggled to understand the precision required. A bomber wasn't a car. It had delicate hydraulics, complex engines, and aerodynamic tolerances. The idea of building one every hour seemed laughable. Critics in Washington whispered that Henry Ford had overreached. Even Charles Lindbergh, once a Ford supporter, doubted the plant could ever deliver what it promised. But inside the cavernous halls of Willow Run, a transformation was taking place. Shift by shift, day by day, the workers adapted. Men who fixed tractors now riveted wings. Women, many of whom had never set foot in a factory before, mastered welding, wiring, and instrument assembly. They became known as Rosie the Riveters, symbols of America's home front power. By 1943, Willow Run employed more than 40,000 people. The plant had its own fire department, hospital, and even housing projects nearby, just to keep up with the demand for workers. The sheer size of the operation left foreign observers stunned. German intelligence reports smuggled out of the United States described the facility as an airplane city. Analysts in Berlin scoffed, insisting the numbers were exaggerated. Yet Luftwaffe officers in occupied France began noticing something troubling. Waves of B-24s appearing in the skies in greater numbers than ever before. To the German High Command, the B-24 was not just another bomber, it was a strategic menace. With its longer range and heavier bomb load compared to the B-17, the Liberator could strike oil fields deep inside Romania, factories in Poland, and U-boat pens along the Atlantic coast. Entire convoys of German troops and supplies suddenly found themselves vulnerable. By late 1943, formations of 500, even 1,000 bombers filled the sky. And behind every one of those aircraft was the relentless hum of Ford's assembly lines. For the men and women at Willow Run, the pressure was relentless. The factory never slept. Day and night, the assembly line crept forward, inch by inch, from bare metal skeletons to fully armed bombers. Engines were tested, guns were mounted, and fresh crews awaited delivery. Every 63 minutes, another bomber rolled out. Every 63 minutes, the balance of power tilted further against the Third Reich. German spies stationed in South America and even in neutral Switzerland sent frantic reports back to Berlin. The Americans are producing machines of war on an unimaginable scale. For Hitler's generals, the reality was chilling. They had gambled on speed, conquest, and blitzkrieg, but in the long game of production, Germany could never compete with the United States, and Ford's Willow Run was the ultimate proof. By 1944, the Willow Run plant had become a legend. Its sheer scale was unlike anything the world had ever seen. From the sky, the factory looked like a vast metallic river, stretching more than a mile long. Inside, the heartbeat of industrial America echoed with every hammer strike, every rivet driven, every engine tested. But the story of Willow Run was not just about machines. It was about people. The workers who filled the factory floor came from every corner of the country. Farmers from the Midwest, coal miners from Kentucky, machinists from New York, and housewives from Michigan all stood shoulder to shoulder. Many had never seen an airplane up close before, yet now they were building some of the most advanced bombers in history. Training programs ran day and night,
New hires were handed blueprints, tools, and crash courses in mechanics. Mistakes were common in the beginning, but soon the rhythm of mass production took hold. Workers spoke of the plant as if it were alive, breathing and pulsing with energy. And in that rhythm, a sense of unity grew. Willow Run was not just a workplace, it was a symbol of national purpose. The Germans, however, could not comprehend such mobilization. In Berlin, reports of American women building aircraft were ridiculed. Nazi ideology dismissed the idea that housewives and secretaries could handle precision engineering. But dismissing them was a grave mistake. These women were welding seams, wiring radios, and riveting metal with skill and accuracy. Their contribution would soon turn into waves of bombers that darkened the skies over Europe. Albert Speer, Hitler's armaments minister, later admitted that Germany's biggest miscalculation was underestimating America's ability to mobilize its industry. While German factories relied on forced labor, Ford's workers, though pushed to their limits, were fueled by a shared sense of duty. As production ramped up, Ford introduced new efficiencies. Conveyor belts carried massive bomber wings across the floor. Special jigs held fuselages in place so teams could work on multiple sections at once. Instead of handcrafting each part, Ford's engineers standardized components, ensuring perfect interchangeability. The result was staggering. By mid-1944, Willow Run alone was producing 14 B-24 bombers every single day. For the Luftwaffe, this was catastrophic. German spies desperately tried to confirm the numbers. They tracked shipping manifests, interviewed dock workers, and intercepted radio chatter. The figures were unbelievable. Thousands of bombers pouring into Europe. Even the most optimistic German assessments could not explain how the Allies had gained such overwhelming air superiority so quickly. But the truth was simple. Every hour, on the other side of the Atlantic, another bomber rolled out of Willow Run. And every hour, the shadow over Nazi Germany grew darker.
By mid-1944, the numbers spoke for themselves. Nearly 8,700 B-24 Liberators had already rolled off American production lines, most of them from Willow Run. No other bomber in history had ever been built in such staggering quantities. But the sheer volume of planes was only part of the story. What truly shocked the Germans was how quickly these machines were reaching the battlefield. Once completed, each bomber was flown directly from Willow Run to airfields across the United States. From there, they joined squadrons bound for England, Italy, and the Pacific. It was a constant flow of steel and firepower, a conveyor belt stretching across the ocean. German intelligence tried desperately to disrupt this pipeline. U-boats prowled the Atlantic, hoping to intercept convoys carrying bomber parts. But Ford's system was too efficient. The planes were being flown, not shipped across America. By the time German analysts detected a rise in bomber activity, the machines were already over Europe, unleashing devastation on German industry. The raids intensified. In August 1943, hundreds of B-24s launched Operation Tidal Wave, one of the most daring missions of the war. Their target? The oil refineries at Ploiești, Romania, which fueled the German war machine. Though losses were heavy, the strike crippled Axis oil supplies. The Germans realized with horror that the Americans could send wave after wave of these long-range bombers. And Willow Run just kept building more. Inside Germany, panic spread.
Civilians watched as formations of bombers, stretching for miles, blanketed the sky. Air raid sirens wailed almost daily. Cities once thought safe were now within reach of the liberators. Factories, railroads, and supply depots were reduced to rubble. Albert Speer later confessed that the psychological impact of America's industrial might was just as devastating as the bombs themselves. German workers knew they could never match this pace. Even if one factory was rebuilt, 10 more American bombers would arrive the next day. And still, Willow Run pushed harder. By late 1944, the plant reached its peak efficiency, one fully assembled bomber every 63 minutes. For German spies, the reports were no longer unbelievable, they were terrifying. If Ford could build one bomber every hour, then the Reich's defeat was only a matter of time. What had begun as Henry Ford's gamble was now America's most powerful weapon.
As the skies over Europe grew darker with liberators, the human story behind Willow Run deepened. For the thousands who worked there, the war was not fought with rifles and grenades, but with rivet guns, welding torches, and endless hours on the factory floor. The factory was relentless. Shifts ran around the clock. Sirens signaled the beginning and end of each work period, echoing through the vast metal halls. Workers labored under the constant roar of machinery, presses hammering steel, engines being tested, and the rattle of rivet guns firing like machine guns in the distance. Many workers commuted long hours, only to find themselves exhausted on arrival. Some slept in their cars between shifts. Others lived in hastily built housing near the plant, entire communities springing up overnight to support the war effort. The stress was enormous. Breakdowns, accidents, and fatigue were common. Yet most endured, driven by the knowledge that every finished bomber might help end the war sooner. Women made up nearly a third of the workforce. Known as Rosies, they became the face of America's home front. Posters showed them with rolled-up sleeves and confident smiles, urging others to join the fight. But behind the propaganda was a harsh reality: long hours, tough conditions, and constant pressure to meet quotas. Still, they persevered. Women who once sewed clothes now stitched parachutes. Secretaries became electricians. Mothers balanced childcare with double shifts. Each played a part in keeping the line moving, every rivet and weld contributing to a machine that would fly thousands of miles into enemy territory. Meanwhile, German spies pieced together fragments of intelligence. Reports of the factory's workforce reached Berlin, and Nazi officials scoffed at the idea of housewives building bombers. They dismissed Willow Run as unsustainable, a patriotic stunt doomed to collapse under its own weight. But as the months passed, reality crushed their doubts. Not only did production increase, it accelerated. By early 1945, Willow Run had built nearly half of all B-24 Liberators in existence. The myth that American workers lacked discipline or skill was shattered. Instead, it was Germany's rigid top-down system that faltered. Where Ford encouraged efficiency and adaptation, German factories relied on forced labor and outdated methods. For the men in the Luftwaffe, the results were devastating. Each mission over the Reich became more dangerous. Enemy radar picked up vast bomber formations, too numerous to shoot down. Even as Germany's famous Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs scrambled to intercept, the bombers kept coming, protected by swarms of P-51 Mustangs. It was a war of attrition, and Germany was losing.
because every 63 minutes, another Liberator joined the fight. Willow Run had become more than a factory. It was the pulse of America's war machine, and for the spies who tracked its output, the conclusion was unavoidable. Germany could never win a battle against an assembly line.
By early 1945, the Allied bombing campaign was relentless. German cities smoldered under constant attack, railways lay shattered, and oil production had nearly collapsed. And at the center of this storm stood Ford's Willow Run plant, still producing bombers at a pace that defied imagination. But behind the staggering numbers was a truth that even German spies eventually admitted. Willow Run wasn't just about machines. It was about organization. Ford engineers had transformed the chaos of early production into a symphony of precision. Specialized teams worked on each section of the aircraft. Fuselages moved down the line as wings were attached, engines mounted, and interiors wired. Each worker knew their role. Each step was timed. Each motion mattered. It was mass production raised to its ultimate form. And the results were visible in the skies above Germany. Entire bomber groups, hundreds strong, filled the horizon. Even when dozens were lost to flak and fighters, the formations never seemed to thin, because for every bomber that went down, another was already being rolled out in Michigan, replacing it within hours. German intelligence struggled to keep up. Reports poured in from neutral countries, estimating that America was producing more aircraft in a single month than Germany could in an entire year. The numbers didn't add up. How could untrained workers, many of them women, build such advanced machines with such speed? The answer lay in Ford's philosophy: interchangeability and efficiency. Unlike Germany's reliance on handcrafted parts, Ford had standardized every component. A wing made in one part of the factory could be fitted onto any fuselage in another. Engines, instruments, and gun turrets were designed to be swapped seamlessly. If one section fell behind, another picked up the slack. This adaptability gave Willow Run a resilience that German factories lacked. Albert Speer himself admitted later, "The greatest surprise of the war was not a weapon, but the speed with which the Americans turned out airplanes." For the Luftwaffe, this industrial onslaught was devastating. Their once proud squadrons of fighters were overwhelmed. Even their secret weapons, the V-1 rockets and jet-powered Me-262s, could not turn the tide. How could they, when America was producing aircraft faster than Germany could shoot them down? By spring 1945, the evidence was everywhere. In missions like the destruction of Dresden's rail yards and the pounding of Berlin itself, Liberators flew in endless waves. Willow Run had given the Allies not just airplanes, but dominance of the skies. And to German spies, the lesson was clear. The Third Reich had underestimated not only America's factories, but the will of its people. Every rivet driven, every shift completed, every bomber produced was another nail in the coffin of Nazi Germany. Because while soldiers fought on the front lines, it was Ford's assembly line that quietly decided the outcome of the war. As 1945 wore on, the writing was on the wall for Nazi Germany. On the ground, Allied armies pushed relentlessly toward Berlin. In the air, the skies belonged entirely to the Allies. And at the heart of that dominance stood the B-24 Liberator. By the end of the war, more than 18,000 Liberators had been built, over 8,500 of them at Willow Run alone. It was a record unmatched in aviation history. No other heavy bomber was ever produced in such numbers. For the Luftwaffe, the consequences were disastrous. Every attempt to regain air superiority was crushed. German fighters scrambled daily, but each sortie cost them irreplaceable pilots and precious fuel. And still, the bomber waves kept coming. Factories were obliterated, oil reserves dried up,
Railways ground to a halt. The industrial heart of the Reich was pounded into ruins. German spies who once laughed at reports of Ford's production capacity now sent grim confirmations back to Berlin. The Americans truly had mastered the impossible. A bomber every 63 minutes, a fleet that seemed endless. For Hitler's high command, the realization was devastating. They had gambled everything on quick victories, believing blitzkrieg would bring Europe to its knees before America could respond. But they had misjudged. America's response wasn't just military, it was industrial. Willow Run had proven that wars in the 20th century would not be won only on the battlefield, but in the factories. Inside the plant, workers began to sense the end was near. By early 1945, the relentless pace continued, but there was a new feeling in the air: anticipation. Every bomber completed felt like one step closer to victory. Many workers hung photographs of loved ones in uniform above their stations. Others scrawled messages on bomber fuselages, short notes of defiance. "This one's for Berlin," or "Remember Pearl Harbor." The planes carried not only weapons, but the spirit of a nation determined to see the war through. And soon, the war did end. In May 1945, Germany surrendered. Across Europe, cities lay in ruins, but the skies were clear of German planes. The Luftwaffe, once feared across the continent, was finished. For German survivors, the lesson was bitter. The Reich had been outproduced, outmaneuvered, and outlasted. For the Allies, victory had been sealed not just by soldiers and generals, but by the tireless men and women of factories like Willow Run. Every 63 minutes, another bomber had rolled out, and every 63 minutes, Germany's chances of victory slipped further away.
The war ended, but the story of Willow Run did not. As peace returned, the factory that had once symbolized America's arsenal of democracy faced a new future. The need for bombers vanished overnight, and Willow Run shifted to peacetime production. But its legacy, its proof that the impossible could be mass-produced, would shape industry for decades to come. German intelligence officers, interrogated after the war, spoke of their disbelief. They admitted they had never truly grasped the scale of American industry until it was too late. One prisoner summed it up bitterly: "We could shoot down 100 bombers today, but tomorrow America would replace them. How could we fight against that?" For them, Willow Run was more than a factory. It was a weapon. In the United States, the workers of Willow Run became unsung heroes. Their names rarely appeared in headlines, but their contribution was immense. While soldiers stormed beaches and pilots braved flak-filled skies, factory workers fought their war with sweat and determination. Every rivet hammered, every engine tested, every bomber completed. Together, they built the machine that broke the Luftwaffe and brought Germany to its knees. The B-24 Liberator became a symbol of what industrial might could achieve. It flew in every theater of the war: Europe, Africa, Asia, and the Pacific. It hunted U-boats in the Atlantic, bombed oil refineries in Romania, and dropped supplies to prisoners of war. By the end of the conflict, it was the most produced heavy bomber in history.
And for German spies who once scoffed at the idea of a bomber built every 63 minutes, the truth became undeniable. America had not only outbuilt the Reich, it had outlasted it. The B-24 Liberator was more than steel, rivets, and engines. It was the embodiment of a nation's resolve. Every completed bomber carried with it the sweat of the worker, the ingenuity of the engineer, and the will of an entire people determined never to surrender. Willow Run's legacy did not end with the war. The factory became a symbol of American innovation, a case study in how mass production could be adapted to almost anything. The lessons learned there rippled across the auto industry, aviation, and even space exploration. In many ways, the Cold War and the space race were born out of Willow Run's example. If America could mass-produce bombers at such a pace, what else was possible? Rockets, satellites, computers? The answer, as history showed, was yes. But beyond technology and industry, Willow Run carried a human legacy. It proved that ordinary citizens, when united under a common cause, could achieve the extraordinary. Men and women who had never imagined themselves as warriors found their place in the war effort, and in doing so, they helped write one of history's greatest chapters. Today, parts of Willow Run are gone, demolished or repurposed, yet its story remains alive in museums, in the memories of those who worked there, and in the history books that recount its miracles of production. German spies, had they lived to see it, would never forget the lesson. Never underestimate the power of an industrial giant when it awakens. From the ashes of doubt rose a factory that became a fortress. From the hands of workers came machines that ended a war. And from the relentless rhythm of Willow Run's assembly line came victory. Not every month, not every week, but every 63 minutes.